when did fitness and movement become this chore? Like one more thing to do and one more mile to get, 10 more reps to get, 10,000 more steps to get. Like when did it become this grind? Like go out and find something, either rediscover a sport that you used to find fun earlier in life, or heaven forbid, try a new one and don't be worried about failing.
Hello and welcome to the Breaking Muscle Podcast, where we bring you conversations on the leading issues in health and fitness today. I am Pete Hitzeman, your host and managing editor at breakingmuscle.com. Do you have a closer relationship with your heart rate monitor than your actual heart rate? When's the last time you went for a ride or a run without something stuck in your ear? Are you using technology to make you a smarter, stronger athlete, or as a substitute for your own thought and instinct? Phil White is co-author of Unplugged, Evolve from Technology to Upgrade Your Fitness, Performance, and Consciousness. He and I chat about finding the why behind your use of technology and the problems that can arise from poor interpretation of inaccurate data and a lack of context. We also dive into the data privacy risks presented by our increasingly connected devices and the physical and psychological benefits of exposing yourself to discomfort. Phil also offers some actionable advice on how to start combating your reliance on technology and talks about how writing the book with Brian MacKenzie and Dr. Galpin forced him to confront some of his own dependencies. Underneath it all, Phil sees an emerging mindset of self-care that can help people change their lives one day and one rep at a time. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to head over to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. And if you have any feedback for us, drop us a line at editorial@breakingmuscle.com. Joining us today on the Breaking Muscle Podcast is Phil White. Phil is the co-author with Dr. Andy Galpin and Brian MacKenzie of Unplugged, which book we have just reviewed in a podcast a couple of weeks ago. Phil is joining us today to kind of dive deeper into some of the other aspects of the book that we haven't conquered already and get into a lot more of the kind of the psychological side of why you need to hold your devices sort of at arm's length. Phil, thanks for joining us today, and how's everything in Colorado?
Thank you, sir. Yeah, everything's going well. Feeling blessed to be in Colorado as always.
It's not a bad place to be. It's not a bad place. So who is Phil White? We have some very recognizable names on the cover of the book, and then there's Phil White, which everybody thinks is Phil Knight, and it's not the same guy.
I wish it was for Andy and Brian's sake, because it looks like Phil's book, Shoe Dog, in Amazon Health and Fitness charts is 3 times in the top 20. Maybe we'd sell more copies if Phil Knight was on there instead of me.
So what's your background? You've mentioned you were doing some work with Kelly Starrett, and you've been around with Tim Ferriss, and where do you come from and where are you going?
Where indeed. So geographically, England. I came over to the US in 2001 to play my kind of football, footy, soccer, a small college in Kansas City, and for some reason best known to the basketball coach as well. And then, met my wife and got married at the end of my sophomore year, which seems to be a very Midwest thing to do. And, she got me. So here I am. And so a few years ago, I was writing, I still write for them, was writing for Sup the Mag, which is kind of the stand-up paddleboarding sister publication of Surfer Magazine and Canoe and Kayak. And Joe Carberry, the founding editor there, kind of gave me the health and wellness and fitness beat. And he didn't just want clickbaity articles, he wanted some substance. And so I jacked up my back deadlifting around this time, and I was really just at a loss. Doctors sent me down the usual pharmaceuticals route and wasn't doing anything, and physio I went to wasn't really doing a whole lot either. And so started Googling, as one does, and found Dr. Kelly Starrett and just shot him and Juliet a note and said, hey, I know you're super busy, but would you be willing to do maybe your top 5 mobility exercises for paddlers, if that's not too nebulous. And so we did an interview for that, and then did a second piece and an accompanying video. And it was right around the time that he was starting to noodle on Ready to Run with a brilliant writer, TJ Murphy, who's also a good friend of ours. And we started kicking around the idea together, Kelly and I, of maybe doing a Ready to Run type book, but for paddlers and surfers. And not a lot of people know, but Kelly's background is kind of a river rat. He was a national team level whitewater paddler back in the day, and also a river guide, and at one point was a rafting guide, and canoes and kayaks and all that good stuff as well, and living out of his van. And so yeah, it was also what he calls his love letter to paddling. And so we also interviewed, Laird Hamilton, Kai Lenny, Dave Kalama, all these great athletes, and that book will hopefully be out next summer. And then we've kind of flip-flopped that one with another book called Flight Plan, which is really about how to not just survive flying, but to also thrive, and interviewed some pretty fun people, Dave Asprey, Jocko Willink, Matt Hasselbeck, and others. And through Kelly, as all these books with him were going ahead, he introduced me to Brian MacKenzie, who then introduced me to Andy Galpin. And Brian and I had been kicking around the idea, too, of writing a book for probably a year or so, and we just settled on this topic of fitness technology, partly because of how pervasive it's becoming, and then he saw how it was being misused in some ways in that elite performance community, and we thought, well, what would happen if we tried to advance the conversation by saying, there are times when you should and can use fitness technology, and if you're going to do it, here's a way to do it better, and some ideas there. And then also there are times when you should disconnect from your tech and reconnect to your own instincts, nature, and other people in authentic community. And that's kind of the two forks in the road of our manifesto, if you can use the word manifesto without being dismissed as a pretentious twat.
I believe that's the first time we've had the words pretentious twat used on used on the podcast. So what are the problems that you see, like stand-up paddleboarding and its associated, like water sports in general, not very conducive to technology anyway, because if you pay attention to a piece of technology, you're going to drown. How pervasive is technology getting there? Like, is that something that's coming into those sports?
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, our friend Jim Terrell at QuickBlade, they released a technology-enabled paddle, and I believe that Jimmy makes the best paddles in the world. He's kind of the master craftsman on that side, while Joe and Jack Bark are kind of the, Bark paddle boards are, about as good as it gets on that side of things. And to my knowledge, the Bark family hasn't embedded sensors in actual boards yet, but I'm sure somebody will at some point. And so yeah, I think that Jim is very smart and is very old school in that way. So for him to take that leap, he must have seen some value in it. But I think just in sports in general, everywhere from the elite level, where it's this British cycling idea of marginal gains, and as Kelly, Brian, Andy, and I have talked about a lot, people look for these potential 0.5% or 1% marginal gains that are little, like, maybe if they're current problems in an athlete's performance or wellness, they're like little speed bumps in the road, but they're falling down into these giant gaping chasms in the road, potholes or sinkholes even, of bad mobility, lack of self-awareness, and bad sleep, and some other things that should be more instinctual, really, if we have honed those instincts and are willing and able to act on those, in sometimes in concert with coaching, which is another thing that we cover in the book pretty extensively. How technology can be used in this three-way relationship between the devices, the coaches, and the athletes as kind of a calibration tool, and also something that can help people connect what they're feeling to what's going on with their physiology, and start to maybe self-identify, and then eventually, hopefully, self-correct movement errors and other shortcomings that they might have.
So for the non-professional athlete, yes, what we're seeing a lot of the time is people are majoring in the minors, as it were. They're managing their heart rate to within 1 or 2 beats a minute, while their diet and their sleep habits are atrocious. So they're nowhere near the level of their physical performance or their physical capacity that they could be at if they paid attention to those bigger non-digital items instead of stressing over the numbers on their devices. But it's not just, obsessing over the data. Can we talk about kind of what technology does to, what an over-reliance on technology can do to blunt your instincts with your training?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the key words you used there was over-reliance, because this is not an anti-technology book. You know, some people have said, oh, well, this is, you know, just you guys are Luddites, like you're saying we should just build a big pile of all of our fitness devices and smash them, you know, and take down the Strava servers or whatever. And we're like, no, you haven't actually read the book. You know, go ahead and read it. That's not what we're saying at all. But the key word you used was over-reliance. And so I think when you start to abdicate decision making to a device on your wrist, or even, you know, we have like sunglasses, you know, with the coach in the ear enabled now, where it's going to look at your pace and tell you when to go faster or when to back off. And also, even beyond that now, there's this Bluetooth drinking cup that will tell you when to drink water and how much based on some arbitrary algorithm. And it's like, really? Like, this is what we've come to. So we know there's the whole debate around drink to thirst, and, you know, we could talk about that for an hour, but it's boring and it's been done to death. But these really human instincts, so say the coach in your ear, all right? It's monitoring some kind of metric, and whether it's pace or whatever. I don't know what baseline you've established there for it to kind of run these on-the-spot algorithms against. But anyway, it's telling you, speed up, slow down, you know, whatever. Go further, stop now. I don't know what the heck it's telling you. But anyway, what is it basing this on? And what it's basing it on is a snapshot. It's a moment in time. And as Andy, being the scientist that he is, and the pragmatist that he is, says, you know, for you to take one data point and make that everything, to be able to extrapolate that to the biggest picture, whether it's pace with a coach in your ear or a coach on your wrist, or it's your sleep score, or maybe it's HRV, and say that therefore you should not train today. Well, that's a pretty freaking big leap, you know? Right. And even Andy says, you know, when he was on Joe Rogan, he mentioned that, you know, in a scientific study, they're trying to get their heads around one or perhaps two variables, but every system in your body has potentially thousands or tens of thousands of variables, and then guess what? These interlink with others in other systems in your body, and you can't apply a reductionist approach to this because the body is not reductionist in nature, it's integrated.
That's kind of a solid point. Like, even if you collect lots of data points, right? Like, I'm a cyclist, and so cyclists are probably the most data-obsessed people on the planet. Thank you, Team Sky. And it's I'm not a Froome fan. It's heart rate, and it's power and cadence and speed sensors and all these other things, and it's all connected to the bike, and it's on your heads-up display mounted on your stem. But like you're saying, that's 5 or 6 variables with questionable accuracy presented in a lack of context with the 10 or 12 other 1,000 things that are going on while you're riding your bicycle across the Alps. It's not enough data to actually give you recommendations intelligently on how you should be riding your bike. Not that should override your own instinct anyway.
Right, and some people have said, well, it seems kind of weird that you interviewed Tim Ferriss for this book because, you know, he's one of the kings of self-quantification and yada, yada, yada. And to us, it isn't weird, because if they knew Tim, they would know that everything he does is very purposeful, and he's a very busy man with a lot of demands on his time. And so when he is quantifying something, it's very, you know, he wants it to be actionable. He wants to make sure that he understands the data points he's collecting. And what he told us is that technology is a great tool, but a terrible taskmaster. And he also said you should really ask yourself the 3 whys anytime you're considering using, whether it's a wristband device, something in your ear, something in your smartphone, or on your smartwatch. And maybe we'll get on the how smart they are in a minute, I don't know. But, you know, why am I wanting to improve in this area, okay? What am I trying to get to? So maybe I'm trying to set a new, you know, PR in a 5K. Okay. Well, why is this power output metric that you just mentioned, or why is this cadence, you know, strike rate, whatever it is, stride length on some of these apps now, why is that important that changes in relation to setting a new 5K, right? Okay, so then, you know, why am I going to proceed in this way then with this data point towards this improving X metric to then get back to the first why, which is, you know, why am I trying to improve my overall performance in general? And so it's really 3 levels of scaling back from an overall goal to a specific data point and then, perhaps a sub-metric within that sphere. And so if you can't answer each level of this, why/what am I trying to achieve, 3 whys/3 whats, then what are you really doing? And Stephen Kotler is another one we interviewed, Rise of Superman, Stealing Fire, and he said, if you're not top 3% in the world and you're trying to be top 1%, frankly, I'm not sure what you think you're measuring. And then even beyond that, what Brian and Andy talk about is, do you have the experience and the know-how to understand the data that you're collecting? And then, as you mentioned a minute ago, to make that actionable. And if you don't, you need to back off and seek the help of a coach to help you connect the dots and to also interpret, not just in this snapshot moment of run faster, run slower, but to start to see trends and patterns in your training, and then to make more comprehensive recommendations based on that kind of thing, rather than just these momentary snapshots, which could be affected by numerous things, right? Like your HRV is not just subject to training stimuli and then whether you recovered adequately from that. Mm-hmm. It can be related if you've had a lot of arguments with your spouse recently, if your kid has been sick, or maybe there's a newborn in the house and you haven't slept well for weeks or months, as a dad, I sure know that one pretty well. And, maybe your nutrition has been trash. Maybe, we get into flight plan a little bit. Maybe you're a road warrior and you travel, you're taking 2 flights a week. Well, guess what? That's going to throw off your HRV. So again, this reductionism is pretty dangerous. And really, you need to start backing off a little bit. And as Tim says, start figuring out this 3 levels of the why/what scenario. What are the outcomes I'm looking for? Why am I trying to get there? And, what measures am I going to take? How are these going to affect that outcome? And then how can I dial that back as far as I can so I'm collecting the least data necessary to make it actionable and get me to my goal? And that doesn't matter whether you're a recreational runner or you're Mo Farah.
And then once you've finished with your 3 whys or whats, take another step back and go, is this working? Like one of the things I get a chuckle about the running team that I'm on, a lot of the runners are very diligent with their training plans to a fault. In other words, if they need to get 18-mile run on Saturday, they're going for that 18-mile run, hell or high water, and then, that's the end of it. Like they blow themselves up, or, they don't realize, 12 miles into an 18-mile run, this is going really badly, or I didn't bring enough water, or something else has gone wrong. They just have that 18 miles, and they're looking at that. And that sort of problem leads into kind of one of the other topics of the book, which is anxiety that's driven by all of these supposed health things that we're attaching to ourselves, your Fitbits and pedometers and all kinds of things that are supposed to make you healthier, but then you're like, it's 11 o'clock at night and you're supposed to be going to bed and you're only at 9,822 steps, so you've got to get out and get more steps,
or start shaking your wrist around because you figured out that hack's it. I've seen grocery store clerks do that.
Yeah. So how smart is that technology if you can just flip your wrist over and fool it?
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it as well, that they, some recent research suggests that putting accelerometer-based devices at that kind of distal end, of a joint or a movement segment is actually a terrible measuring tool, or a terrible positioning for that measuring tool.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, is this working? Is the fitness technology that you're engaging in, whether you're, logging your nutrition with an app, or whether you're using a Fitbit or a Garmin or whatever it is that you're strapping onto yourself to throw some numbers in your face, are you getting closer to where you want to be as a human being, not just an athlete, by wearing all this stuff? And a lot of times the answer isn't yes. It might not be a hard no, but it's not really a hard yes either. One of the other things you brought up in the book that I thought was kind of interesting, I hadn't really thought about before, is the data privacy issue, right? So everybody's getting hacked all the time. Anybody who's worked in IT security, which is one of my other lives, can tell you that if it's in digital anything and connected to the internet, it's already been hacked. Like, if somebody wants that data, they're going to get it.
Sure.
What are the risks there? Like, these things are all collecting a whole bunch of your personal information.
Yeah. I mean, while Brian and I were talking about this one day, and Andy had some great input as well, and Kelly Starrett was one of the people that pushed us to really include this section in the book, and so kudos to him as well. Brian just broke away for a second from our line of conversation and said, like, holy crap, dude, this book could trigger a wave of class action lawsuits on the data privacy front. Because let's look at HIPAA and the other privacy laws in the medical industry, in healthcare. Now, when you go into a hospital and you have to sign that packet of forms, some of those are related to privacy, and they're the ones where there's like one face sheet, with the signature box and the date at the bottom, but there's like 15 other pages behind it, like the small print, okay, the disclaimer of this, and basically what some of that is saying, okay, this information, we're pledging to you as a hospital and health system that this information will be kept private. We will not sell this information to a third party. We will only disclose this to you or somebody that, if it's like an older person that needs an advanced care directive or a PULSE form or something like that, someone that is, you have authorized to be in charge of your care. And they're really, they're pretty serious about you filling in one of these type of forms at least once a year, which is that annoying thing where you're like, didn't I fill this in last time? I'm like, come on, really? But there's a reason for it. Like, be okay with the annoyance factor and the frustration factor. And the healthcare industry, as both regulated, they try to put some internal regulations at each of these organizations. There are state requirements, and then there are federal requirements, whether it's Medicare, Medicaid, and they're pretty hardcore about this. And good, okay, that's good. And we know that there are data leaks from hospitals, and they get in big trouble and big fines and everything, but at least there is regulation there, and they're required to have all those forms. When you purchased your fitness tracker, even if it was digitized, was there a screen where you had to scroll all the way down to the bottom and click I accept, or you signed up for an online fitness program, same deal? And if so, did you bother reading any of that? And the answer, I think, that both those is no. Well, the first no means we don't need a second yes or no on question number 2. And so what are they doing? What are these you're paying a company for a device, and they are using that data to hopefully improve the algorithm for the user base. Terrific, great, awesome. But what else are they doing with it? And in the book, we cite a couple of studies from leading independent Washington, D.C. think tanks that state that the next step in this wearables revolution is going to be personalized ads on your fitness tracker, on your smartwatch, your phone, and that they may even go as far as looking at your weaknesses based on your data and targeting medications, pharmaceuticals, around those perceived weaknesses. So it's not going to be like, oh, I see most of the time when you use this device, you are running. It's like a multi-activity device. So here's some running shoes, or if you're paddling, here's a new paddle. No, it's also likely to be pharmaceuticals. And now some people may say, whoa, these guys are like hoarding 50 tons of grain in in an underground bomb-proof shelter somewhere in Colorado, and they're crazy. And but this is this is legitimate reporting that we did in writing this book, and this is coming. And so these aren't far-flung theories. This is what is coming next. And what gives that company the right to package and sell your data to a third party in a way that a healthcare organization, if you had to retain legal counsel, they would not be able to do it. There are multiple industries where they would not be, even on the consumer side, where they would not dream of doing this. And yet why do these fitness technology companies get a hall pass with this? And what are the legal implications for that? I think one of our subheads is like, we want our data and we want it now, or something silly like that. But I think it does speak to the wider issue of they're selling you a device for hundreds of dollars, and then they are potentially profiting off the data that they are collecting to the tune of, who knows, thousands or millions of dollars to third parties. And if you think pop-up ads are annoying in your browser or on your iPad now, buckle up.
Well, you don't think all those full screen or full color screen, touch screen LCD, you don't think they're going to let all that real estate go to waste, right? I mean, there's money to be made there. If it's a screen in front of an eyeball, that's monetizable. And
yeah.
to your point that if anybody thinks we have the tinfoil hats on right now, dude, what wouldn't a pharmaceutical company do to put their product in front of your eyeballs? Pharmaceuticals in the United States are a Wild West anyway, because they basically kind of own the FDA. Yeah, I completely think that's well within the realm of possibility if the users of the devices, you and I, don't stand up early and often and say, we're not going to do that. We're not going to use your stuff. If you're going to start selling our stuff to other people, we'll find another service. We'll invent a service out of thin air. All this technology is fairly inexpensive to make anymore. So I think it would be fairly easy to disrupt that market if somebody starts doing something sly. But we as consumers have to demand transparency on that sort of thing, or it's not going to happen.
Yeah, and I mean, really, there just needs to be a set of, it could be 10 very simple universal standards that all of these companies have to adhere to. They are, either as part of their industry association agreements, or it could be, I'm not one for big government, but of course I'm not live in Colorado, but it could be government mandated. Now, obviously, if there were 10 that was government mandated, there'd be like 1,700 pages of legalese behind it, but at least someone proposing a bill in Congress to say, this is freaking out of control, as you said, this is the Wild West, and it's we, the consumer, that are demanding change, because you do not have the right to sell that data to a third party, you do not have the right to manipulate that data in a way that could potentially be intrusive, and enough is enough, and put that up. And so I'm not arrogant enough to think that this book's going to start a revolution, but I hope it might at least prompt those question marks in some people's minds, because when we went down that rabbit hole just a little way, we could have written probably just a whole book on that.
Well, there's some interesting analogs in other industries as well, with cars becoming more software-based and requiring software updates and that sort of thing. There's some butting of heads between auto manufacturers and consumers as to who actually owns the software that runs your vehicle. And that's actually come up in agriculture as well. There was a big thing about John Deere basically refusing to work with some farmers because they had hacked the software on their tractors.
Wow.
It's really interesting. If you ever find that article, it's things you would never have thought of behind the people that are mowing your corn. I want to take a hard left. So what's the temperature in your office right now?
Oh, I don't know. We don't have air conditioning here, so it's whatever the weather dictates.
Well, that's a luxury in Colorado, I suppose. So in my office, it's like 75 because I turn the air conditioning off because it's gorgeous outside. But one of the things that was very interesting to me in the book was intentionally exposing yourself to nature, and that means discomfort. Hot baths and cold showers and hunger and thirst, and sort of these extremes that we have, for all of human history, we have been working to get rid of those problems, and now we've done it. But as a result, we're kind of unhealthy and unhappy. What are the sort of the recommendations that you guys talk about to get back into a more natural state?
Yeah, and first off, I'll say that we don't want to veer into Scott Carney's lane here with what doesn't kill us, but obviously, Brian and Andy in their work with XPT and LED, and then what Brian's doing now in power, speed, endurance, particularly with using the hot and cold exposure in conjunction with breathing, and some of the benefits there. And what we found when we look at the work of people like Dr. Rhonda Patrick, Found My Fitness, which is an excellent resource, and if you don't subscribe to that newsletter, do it, because it's a great snapshot. She really puts it into understandable terms for the layperson. And so what her and other researchers have found is that there are these mechanisms in the body that start to go dormant if we do not activate them through extremes of temperature. And so there are things called cold shock proteins in the body, and also heat shock proteins. And these are things that have been shown to increase longevity, reduce the risk of cardiovascular disease, reduce the incidence of degenerative brain conditions. And there are a lot of studies, a lot of these coming out of Scandinavia, where these have been part of their culture, and Japanese culture obviously as well, for a very long time. And back in the day, I imagine when someone in Norway or Sweden was in a geothermic hot pool, and then decided to go and hollow out a little hole in a frozen lake afterwards and run and jump in that because they liked the way it made them feel afterwards. They felt great. Well, they didn't have a fancy lab, with all this technology and they didn't need that to tell them that it worked. It just made them feel good, and therefore those traditions perpetuated themselves. And we start to see some of the same with the breathing traditions, say of Native Americans or of native peoples in Nepal and India and Pakistan and this kind of thing that have made breath work, and even with martial arts from Japan, have made breath work a central tenet of their daily life, almost like brushing their teeth. They do this just a daily ritual, a daily practice. And what are some of the reasons for that? Well, state change is one. With the breathing, it can help you, if you're able to recognize your breath patterns enough and do a little bit of the basic educational stuff that Brian offers through PSE Breathes and the Art of Breath clinics that him and Rob Wilson do. You can start to see that every state, every emotional, physical, and cognitive state has an associated breath pattern. And so to manipulate your state, to get into and stay in longer, whether it's a flow state like Stephen Kotler talks about, or it's you need to downregulate at the end of the day because you've had an awful day at work, and then principal called and said your son's in the office because he swore at another kid or did whatever, and it's just been that you got stuck in traffic on the way home and it made you late for a dinner date with the mother-in-law, that kind of, we're all in big trouble with that kind of thing. So whatever it is, if you're stressed out, there are breath patterns to downregulate, to upregulate, and everything in between. So there's state change. There's different ways to hack into your nervous system, and as Casper van der Meulen and Brian have said, it's breathing is like the remote control for the brain and the nervous system, if you know how to wield it. And self-experimentation with all this is key, of course, but back to your original point, you can start to combine some of these breathing protocols and techniques with hot and cold exposure to even amplify some of the effects, the beneficial effects that Rhonda Patrick and others have discovered. And they enable you to be more fully present in hot and cold. Because like with an ice bath, for example, or even a cold shower, everyone's natural instinct is to just get out of it. And the funniest one is if you put your kids in there, not necessarily an ice bath, but just in a cold shower, even if you tell them in advance, hey, we're going to, that weird thing that he does sometimes, that cold shower, we're going to see, what do you think about that? Oh, yeah, I want to try that. I can do that. And then they get in there and it's like, and they run out. Well, the breath work enables you to stay in that. And so really it's just about building in a bit more adversity into our lives, and trying to start to undo some of the damage or reactivate some of the things that have become dormant because we're air conditioned in our cars, we're air conditioned in our homes, and we've largely tried to program adversity and extremes out of our daily lifestyle, as you said a moment ago.
Yeah, I think there's an interesting tie-in there because one of the things I brought up with Andy is whether our instincts are so broken that we can't do without technology now. And the answer is partially yes. You're not going to go run out of your house naked and run in the woods and probably be able to survive for weeks at a time without kind of working up to that. The woods part, not the naked part. Mm-hmm. But what I've found through long experimentation on my own is that making myself uncomfortable has put me more in touch with those instincts. A number of years ago, I went to a little seminar, and a guy there talked about intermittent fasting, and I was like, it's not going to do anything. And dude, it really changed my relationship with food. Like, I can go now half a day without a meal, and it's not like super happy. I would much rather have a meal, but like I can still function, I can still work. There's not a panicky feeling associated with it like it kind of used to be when you're really hungry. The alarm bells start to go off in your head, and if you aren't in that state very often, or you're not in the cold very often, or you're not 60 miles deep in the woods on a bike ride and not really sure how you're going to get back very often, and you don't learn how to handle those situations and how to kind of override the panic feeling and get on about the business of living. So it's not just, there are physiological adaptations. Andy talked about there's gene expressions that happen when you're exposed to these various extremes. And it just makes you harder to kill. Like, it makes you a lot mentally stronger to be out there. And so, like, it doesn't even have to be that extreme. Can you talk about some of the approaches you guys put out in the book? Like, you don't have to go climb Everest with no clothes on. You can actually, like, do some daily small things to expose yourself to these stimuli.
Yeah, I mean, one of the simple challenges we give people is just go truly unplugged, or if you have to take your phone with you, maybe you live in a sketchy area or something like that and you're worried from a security standpoint, just turn it to silent, and just go outside and be fully engaged in whatever you find there for 15 to 30 minutes a day. At the basic level, that's pretty easy to do. And then maybe just try to add in one more workout a week where even if you're collecting the data, where you don't look at it in real time, you just review it at the end. Like, Map My Run and some of those are great because they'll collect the route data. You don't need that while you're doing it. Now, sure, you can view it while you're doing it, but review it later and see if it correlates with what you thought you did, whether that's distance, whether that's speed, that kind of thing. And then maybe just go low tech a little bit as well. So rather than being in a high tech gym, go to Home Depot, buy a couple of buckets and some bags of gravel, and carry them up and down your driveway. Or if, like me, if you have a hill at the back of your house, go run up and down the hill with your buddy and do some pull-ups in between, rather than going on your treadmill and running on it on an incline for a while and then doing some pull-ups in between. Trade the treadmill for the trail. Maybe trade your exercise bike for a real bike, or at least get out on a real bike occasionally. Or like with me, I don't use my Concept 2 rowing machine during the summer, and hopefully the lake will stay unfrozen until the end of November again, because I like to go out and stand-up paddle twice a week. There's no need for me to do intervals indoors on a rower where I can drive 5 minutes to a lake and go paddle, and if I wanted to do intervals there, I can recreate that pretty well. And even if you live in the city, there's studies in the book, a couple of Japanese studies, I believe, that show that just looking at pictures of nature for 60 seconds can fundamentally start to change your physiology and lower inflammation markers, start to reduce your blood pressure, reduce perceived feelings of stress or anxiety. So imagine what 60 seconds, or heaven forbid, 15 minutes, 30 minutes of actual immersion in nature might do for you. And the Japanese have this term, and it's a bad anecdote because I can't remember the bloody name of this thing, but they have a term for bathing, it means bathing in the forest, and they're not literally meaning dragging your clawfoot bathtub out into the forest and taking a bath in it, or even your ice bath, I guess, per what we talked about earlier. But it just means full immersion. And even recently, I listened to Tim Ferriss's guest podcast where he had Cal Fussman, who he's trying to push to have his own podcast, and he bloody well should. He's a great interviewer. Had him interview Larry King. You and I talked about that a bit earlier on today. And Larry talks about his biggest tip to people, other than just being curious, is be present, like be in the moment. And he says, even if he interviewed Barack Obama yesterday and he's interviewing you or I today, and maybe we're not the former president of the United States, doesn't matter. Like he's going to put yesterday's interview, no matter how great and how satisfying that was to him, out of his mind. He's going to be fully present in the moment with you for as long as you're willing to talk to him. Like, how profound is that? How simple is that? How profound is that? And how often are we truly present versus giving in to what, really, she's a sociologist, Linda Stone calls the phenomenon of continuous partial attention, where we're just flitting from one thing to the next, never fully being present, never truly being in a moment. And so what Larry's talking about, the guy's done 50, 60,000 interviews in his career, and you can tell, like, he's excited to be there. He wants to be there. So if you're talking about getting back out in nature, whether it's, on an extreme level, or you're going to go climb Everest, or just you're going to go run a trail that, in your city that leads through a park, maybe, just change your route a little bit. Just be engaged, be fully present, and, whether it's noticing bird song, or smelling a wood fire, or maybe running into an old friend or a potential new one, you stop and have a conversation. Like, heaven forbid, you might be open to that possibility. That it could, these very simple things of getting outside your front door, being fully present in the moment, are accessible to all of us, no matter where we live. It's the simplest thing. Just do it 15, 30 minutes a day, and start to see, what like you said earlier, what are the outcomes of that? What positive changes is that giving you? And I'm going to get a bet that, like with your intermittent fasting, you're going to find it recalibrates you a little bit.
Absolutely. One of the things, as an entrepreneur with several hats, I'm that continuous partial attention thing absolutely resonates with me, because I'll have 3 monitors up, I have 7 email accounts, somebody's screaming at me on Facebook because nobody wants to just answer an email, they want to have a Facebook message. It's very difficult for me to put those things aside, and so I actually noticed early this year, for the first time in my life, I was suffering from like anxiety symptoms. And I'm not an anxious person. I'm typically fairly relaxed. But I'm like, man, my heart rate's through the roof, and I'm just like, I'm gritting my dentist is yelling at me because apparently I'm grinding my teeth, and there's all these things going on. I'm like, this is not me. But what I found out is that I was training inside a lot. I was skipping training a lot. I hadn't been on my mountain bikes in forever. I hadn't been trail running. I hadn't been doing the things that I do normally to kind of get away from all the crap that I have to do. And it had a profound effect on my health, my mental health, my relationship with my wife. Like it was not a good time. And so I finally, figured out I need to just put a line in the sand, and I need to go run. And we're really fortunate where I live that there's 330 continuous miles of paved bike trail. There's a dozen or so really good parks with hiking and running trails. There's all kinds of opportunities to go do it. It's not like I live in the middle of this urban like nightmare. I just wasn't doing it. I wasn't choosing to do it because I was trying to chase down all these things and answer all these emails. So, yeah, it's important to recognize in yourself. And I don't know if it's a chicken and egg thing. Can you have the awareness when you're only continually partially paying attention to everything? Can you have the awareness to realize what's going on? There's a saying in the aviation community that you only know you've lost situational awareness after it happened. And I wonder if that's the case when people are too plugged in. But if that's the case, then read the book, and it'll help you become aware.
Buy early, buy often, right?
Yeah, no, I don't like to plug stuff, but this is a solid. I mean, it's a really solid book. It's well reasoned. It's well put together, and I think it can be really helpful for a lot of people, including myself. Why isn't more better? Right? Everybody's sitting on the couch, and we're not taking care of ourselves. Why shouldn't we just buy a fitness thing that tells us to do more and do more?
If your current level is 0, if you are completely sedentary, and you also only ever move between indoor environments, like you get up in the morning, you drive to your office, you drive to the mall, you drive to a restaurant, you drive home, and then rinse and repeat the next day. And that's not to look down on anyone that works in an office, because heaven knows most of us do. But if a fitness tracker provides early stage motivation for you to reestablish a baseline of movement and of activity, then great. If you are a mid-level or even elite competitor, and it is providing some insight that is actionable, and you've been able to chart your progress and your progression since you started using a particular technology, awesome, keep doing that. But I think when it starts to become a chore, whether that's for the stay-at-home dad or the soccer mom who meets up with a group at the mall to walk, or to walk outside would be a better choice, but you know what I'm saying, and is despite doing that, at the end of the day, is at 8,439 steps and is stressed out of their mind about that because it's one more gosh dang thing they have to do to now sit there and twiddle their wrist for 10 minutes, or to go feel like they have to do another walk. Or if it's becoming if you realize that it's becoming a fixation, or maybe you suspect it is, and you ask, I don't know, say your wife or your husband or your kids or your best mate that you train with, whatever. Do what changes have you noticed in me since I started using, insert name of X device? Are those good or bad? Do you think that there's any kind of level of addiction there, And sometimes you need somebody to speak truth into your life like that, just like in any other relationship or aspect of your existence. And so if it's starting to become the kind of thing that Adam Alter describes in the book Irresistible, which I think is one of the best companion books to ours and one that greatly informed us, then then it's time to hold up your hand and say, yeah, this is becoming an issue for me. It's taking more out of me than it's putting in, or it's adding more stress than it's helping me relieve. And whether that's yourself, your own level of awareness, it's your coach, if you have one, it's a family member or a friend, then start to say, okay, well, how can I not necessarily ditch it, because then you might just stop doing what you're doing altogether, but how can I start scaling it back? Again, like Tim Ferriss said, the key takeaway other than the 3 whys/whats are use the least amount of technology necessary, not the most that you think you can handle.
Right. The stages of technology use, I think, are really interesting things because it kind of puts some boundaries on when it's useful and when it's not. And as you say, I think early stage technology use in the early stage of your fitness journey, which I hate using that word, but there it is.
You're going to use the word paradigm next.
Oh yeah, we're going to shift some paradigms, and we're going
to do it. Yeah, you can digitally slap me over the interwebs.
But it can be reuseful, and I've seen that sort of in my own progress from smoking fat kid to mediocre athlete, if you will. There was a time that I was just all stuck in my technology because I wanted to. Every week I went out, I was doing something better, stronger, or faster. So I wanted to watch that progress. And over time, I realized what it was costing me. I remember actually I ran a 10K, and I was using my phone as a GPS, and I was also playing music. And when I went and looked at my run afterward, I realized I was slowing up and speeding down according to which song was playing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, somebody would say I just had a bad playlist, and that might be true, but it became just one more thing I didn't need to manage, and one more thing that was detracting from my running experience because I was being distracted by this outside influence instead of being in the moment, being present, paying attention to what I was doing. And I sort of developed a sort of disinterested, standoffish attitude towards my data since then, to kind of watch what it does, but not let it dominate me, as it were. You've mentioned a number of influences on the book. Can you touch on some of the pop culture influences that you guys went after? There was it David Eggert's book, The Circle, I think was one?
Oh yeah, Dave Eggers, yeah, for sure. I think one of the reasons that movie got slammed, and I don't look at Rotten Tomatoes to give me permission to watch a movie because I hate that all the people that are like, well, the New York Times gave it 2.5 stars. Crawford at the Atlantic said it was wretched, so I can't watch it.
Right.
Holy groupthink. Like how far are we going to take this before we realize we can actually make decisions for ourselves? But outside of that, I think one of the reasons that the movie got a backlash against it was that it holds up an inconvenient truth. And we were even talking with our publisher, Erich Krauss, at Victory Belt the other day, and he said, I had concerns about this book to begin with, and hopefully he'll call me after this and yell at me, but I don't think he will. He's pretty candid. That I'm worried that people are going to think you're standing over there saying you're doing everything wrong, even though you're going to prescribe some things that they can maybe do better to improve their lives. But that anytime that's the premise of a book, that can be kind of a hard sell. But so Dave Eggers' The Circle. If you're not familiar with the premise, I don't want to give you a spoiler. Basically, this young girl goes to work at a social media company that has kind of subsumed all of the current ones that dominate our lives so much. And at first everyone's super friendly, and they have all these great happy hours and these get-togethers, and then she starts to realize that there's a more sinister undercurrent here, and that people seem to spend all their time on campus. And she starts to go down the rabbit hole, and they also start to pressure her, like, oh, it really hurt our feelings that you weren't at such and such event, and we see that you haven't been engaging with your followers very much online, and your social score is too low, and so she starts feeling this external pressure. And at one point in the book, there are, I think, 4 pages dedicated to all the metrics that she's improving, just staying up till 4 in the morning. Oh, I've got to get more followers, I've got to get better engagement, and this, so certain parts of it people may say is a caricature, but Dave Eggers is one of the best minds that we have in our society at looking at the absurdity, and not necessarily like a Dilbert level, but and creating a narrative to hold up this mirror to us. And one of the characters, this girl's ex-boyfriend, decides, I want no part of this, and he says, like, you spend all this time online, and clicking, likes or dislikes of people's photos of their trip to Nepal. Like, what would happen if you actually went? Like, we used to go places and we used to do things, and that's he's almost like the wake up call, but nobody's heeding him, and eventually he tries to go off the grid, and things end badly for him. He's not able to, and things end badly for him. So there were spoilers in there, and forgive me, I apologize. But yeah, read it, because it takes some of the themes, like in 1984 and The Matrix, and we mentioned some of those in the book, and Blade Runner, and just takes them to the next level and puts them in a cultural context. And again, just highly influential. And then on the other end, there's a book called Feet in the Clouds by the British journalist Richard Askwith, who also wrote a brilliant book about Zatopek, the long-distance runner, which is an outstanding biography. And in Feet in the Clouds, what he's talking about is fell runners. So that's the equivalent of trail running in the UK, but it's not dry and dusty like it is in Colorado. It's wet and muddy and horrible. And basically, you run up a bloody big hill, and then you run down it even faster, like pell-mell, hell for leather, as fast as you bloody can without dying, right? And at the end, if you win, there isn't this massive check like at the Tour de France or whatever event, but there's like a 4-pack of beer and a £20 gift certificate to the local pub, that kind of thing. And his point was it's one of the last true amateur sports in Britain, and he embedded pretty deep and ran, and they do these tours. So instead of it being like one big bloody hill, it's like 70, and oh, by the way, you have 24 hours to run them all, and you have to start at like 2 a.m. And you have to have your mates do it, and so there's some misadventures in there, but it was such a delightful book, and I found it at an Oxfam bookstore, Oxfam being like a thrift store / charity shop in the UK, and sometimes there's just a bookstore that they have, and it's outstanding. You can buy all these books for £1 or £2. So I just randomly picked it up because I liked the cover, and I did judge the book by its cover, and I thought, oh, this sounds interesting. Read the jacket, and like, yeah, I'll grab this for £1. Read it on the way back from England, and really, this was right when Brian and I had decided, yes, we're going to do this. Yes, we want to pull in Andy, and so I have these two extremes. I have these fell runners in one side of my brain that are just out there, and they're just manic and hardcore, and they go and drink afterwards, and it's similar to rugby culture in a way. Like recovery is like a pint of Guinness with a pinch of salt in it, and maybe a pickled egg and a packet of salt and vinegar crisps. It's like really advanced sports nutrition here. And then on the other side, you have this fully realized dystopia, this tech dystopia that Dave Eggers has fashioned for us, and this mirror that he's holding up that apparently from the reviewers on Rotten Tomatoes, a lot of people don't like it. So these are kind of the ends of the spectrum that were kind of informing me on a narrative level and on a reading level.
That's kind of a good segue. You are working with two guys who are pretty different in their approaches to everything. Brian MacKenzie of Power, Speed, Endurance, and Andy Galpin, who spends way too much time in a lab coat and writes research. So it's not like I've read it and it's hard to read because it's research. How did you mesh those voices? Because the book is written sort of from Brian's perspective, but obviously it's all three of you contributing. So how did that work from a writer's perspective?
Yeah, we just realized early on, and through Kelly's books, we do that in the first person through his voice as well. And so that's not new. And when you have two co-authors, it's going to be messy. Like, hey, this is Phil, this is Andy, this is Brian. I just find that annoying and pretentious and stupid. So we just didn't want it to be disjointed in that way. But one of Andy's missions in life and in his vocation is to kind of take things that are evidence-based and new advances, when he's doing science, as he tells me, like, sorry, I missed your call, but I was too busy doing science, which is fair, and I was like, I wasn't, so now I feel stupid. But anyway, and translate those findings for the masses. And so I think he told me one time that the average academic research paper gets like 6 or 7 viewers, and it's all people within that realm. And he's like, but these advances, they can be highly applicable to the layperson or even to the elite competitor or anywhere in between. And so how can we take what we're learning and apply it? And then, Brian is the master self-experimenter, and he is also in a coaching relationship with people every day in, day out, whether that's through Out of Breath seminars or PSE or whatever it might be. And so, in his 15-plus year career in the high-performance world, he's learned how to not just apply things to elite athletes, but also to the layperson and to everyday Joes like me. And so you have this scientist who has this incredible mind and this incredibly practical and logical mindset, but yet a desire to make things applicable. And then you have this experimenter, this guy who's almost really a mad scientist in his own lab of human performance. And the lab rats are himself and the people he trains. And he just has a different way of looking at things. And he has what he calls, he truly does have a white belt mentality, where despite the heights that he has reached in his profession and how well regarded he is, he never thinks that he knows everything about a subject. and he is always curious, and he's always willing to learn more, and heaven forbid admit he might be wrong on something and change his stance. So then you bring those two things together, and then you add in a little storytelling / interviewing from me, and then I guess you get Unplugged as the end result. And so that was pretty fascinating, having the impact of these two guys just lighting my brain on fire every day, and then figuring out how to structure that, balance that, and put it through Brian's voice.
How's it changed your daily practice, having had those voices in your ears all day, every day for weeks and weeks?
Yeah, I mean, I'll admit that I used to set up mistruths about my training and then live them out. They were self-fulfilling prophecies. So what you talked about the intermittent fasting, so in the book we feature a guy called Dr. Frank Merritt, who by day is an ER doctor down in Florida, physician. He's also board certified in internal medicine, and by night is like a self-trained exercise physiologist. And he came up with, when he found out that his best friend had the worst, most aggressive kind of brain cancer and been given 6 months to live, Frank got together with a multidisciplinary team of endocrinologists, oncologists, all this different stuff, and came up with this protocol. And they managed to keep this guy alive for 7 years, in which time he fathered 2 kids, he practiced law almost until the end, did all these wonderful things. And part of this was fasting. And so out of Unplugged, we developed a relationship and came up with a book called The 17-Hour Fast, which will be out later this year, again through Victory Belt. And so part of this practice has illuminated, and these discussions began right in the middle of Unplugged, that we do not need to eat all the time. And when we are in a fed state, and this was something that came from Andy, that there are processes that turn off in our bodies. And one of them is autophagy, which is a fancy way of saying the cleaning out of dead and dying cells and of using that matter to start new cell growth and regeneration. And that part of that mechanism gets switched off and can become dormant if we are constantly in a fed state. And so previously, I would think if I didn't have a couple of handfuls of almonds or pumpkin seeds or something equally natural grocers and hippie-ish, Colorado, yes, and an apple or a banana 30 minutes before I trained, that I was going to have a crappy training session. And I also thought if I don't down a protein shake or a 3-egg omelet or something like that, with it, the 20 grams of protein within 20 minutes, 30 grams within 30 minutes, pick your protocol and your cliche, that my recovery was going to be crap. And so through the combination of Brian and Dr. Merritt and Andy, I found out that this was a mistruth that was largely just a psychological construction, and that once I stopped doing that, I was able to train just fine, and my liver can produce plenty of energy through that ketone and glucose blend to fuel me for hours. And and as you talked about earlier, that makes you more resilient, because say you've got this window where you think, right, I'm going to eat lunch, I've got this to do at work, and then I'm going to go train. It's the only time, day or night, I can train today. Well, then your boss calls you, or an editor calls you and asks you to pitch in for something that another freelancer let him down, and that window to eat lunch goes away. But yet you still have to train, or you figure you can't train. Well, traditionally I would have just said, oh, I can't train today, or I would have done it like, oh, it's going to be crap today. And then you add to this my own tech problems, where I would think I would have to have a playlist in when I did something like a hard rowing interval workout, where I would have to have this driving electronic music playlist, or something hard and fast to get me through those intervals, because they're going to be a sufferfest, bro, and I'm going to be dying halfway through, and it's going to suck. And again, Brian and Andy just called me out on that. Like, that's number one, that's bull crap. Number two, it's in your head. And number three, go do that same workout tomorrow and see what happens without your headphones. And then, by the way, combine that with the not having to eat, right before or right after, and see what happens. And it became clear to me that we create these constructs and these fallacies in our minds, and then we live them out in our bodies. Like, if you think, oh, I guess I'll do it, but it's going to suck. Well, it's probably going to suck, And so our psychology can, in some ways, largely dictate our physiological outcomes. And so once these guys held me accountable and exposed these fallacies to me, it completely changed how I trained.
Yeah, I kind of got exposed to my own fallacies very recently. I went to RAGBRAI, which is a ride across Iowa. And when I go ride my bike, I'm kind of like you. I'm very sort of fastidious about what I eat before I go and what I'm going to take in my bottles. How long am I? If I'm going to be on a 40-mile ride, that's a 2-bottle ride, and I'm going to have scratch in the first bottle, and I'm going to have something else in the other. Well, when you're riding across Iowa in the world's largest mass bicycle tour, you don't do any of those things because every 8 miles there's a stop, and there's your nutrition along the ride is inch-thick pork chops and beer, and it's not what I would normally do, and it's not something I would advise people to do all year long because that's a good way to get fat while you ride 500 miles. But it was really interesting to me that I would get back on the bike after having a pork chop and a beer, and I felt fine. I was riding okay, I was going up hills fine, I was handling the bike okay. I was like, oh, well, maybe, Nat's assing my nutrition like I'm Chris Froome is not really that necessary because I'm not Chris Froome. And also, it's you're a lot more resilient than that. Your body can make do with all kinds of stuff that you give it, provided you're not being stupid. It was very eye-opening to me because I thought that I was a pretty relaxed guy until I went to Iowa and found out that I needed to relax a lot more. I feel like you've mentioned about 10 books that you're working on or are about to work on. Are you sleeping at all ever? Or
Oh yeah.
Okay.
I just don't get up very, very early because one, I'm crap in the mornings, and number two, I write late a lot because I have all the keep the lights on tasks during the day. I mentioned a tech company I do some writing for. I write for Sup the Mag, for the Inertia, for these magazines, and all the stuff that I need to do to pay the bills, because book royalties only pay once every 6 months, and when you have a mortgage and 3 people depending on you, that's not reality unless those royalties start to go real big, real quick. And so, I get most of my book writing done. Best case, if it's a slower day and I get everything done for the pay the bills type stuff in the morning or early afternoon, then I might be able to work on it a bit in late afternoon or early evening. And then I'm very intentional about turning my phone off for a few hours to hang out with my kids and my wife before the kids go to bed. And then, if my good lady wife, who's also my developmental editor, by the way, it's like a team effort here, and she's the only reason that Unplugged is in any way coherent. But then if she says, well, we're going to watch this movie tonight, do you want to watch it? And I think, nope, romantic comedy, no interest in that, dear, as you probably figured. Well, it's kind of a loaded question, so I'm just going to go work. And so I just go as late as I can until I can't see straight. And so, I just find that Stephen Kotler, I think, told Joe Rogan when he was on the show a while back that every writer he knows is either up earlier and working and writing before anyone is awake, or is still up writing after everyone is asleep. And so for Stephen, that's morning, and for me, that is night. And most of the other writers I know there is no halfway house; it's one or the other. And so pretty serious about the sleep, and using some just simple apnea protocols from Brian. like a 5-second nasal inhale, a 15-second hold, and a 10-second nasal exhale for 10, 15, 20 minutes at night just to down-regulate. Because once you've been writing for a few hours, even though you may be systemically tired, your brain is on fire. That feeling, and so even though I use Flux and all these other apps to try to block blue light on my little Microsoft Surface tablet, I just find that it's hard to shut the brain down. So I'll admit that I use a little chemical help with ZMA, and then the breathing, and that usually knocks me out pretty good. And so don't worry, bro, I'm getting enough recovery. It's just odd. I'm just keeping odd hours.
Well, that is a pretty common thing for writers too. I feel like I'm a little bit of an anomaly because my other jobs require me to follow a fairly normal-ish schedule, but left to my own devices, I'm definitely like the 8 to 10 a.m. window is where the words just fly, and everything, if I have to write in the evening, which happens because life's like that, it's like pulling teeth. It's so bad. Anyway, I want to get to kind of the last part of the book, and you guys did a very mean thing and put the really coolest information at the end, but that means they have to read the whole book to get there if they're like me, because I have to read a book in order. I can't skip around.
Me too. I have to write it in that order. I can't skip around. I'm so freaking sequential. Even with movies, something that has a lot of flashbacks, No interest. No interest.
So Memento was a terrible movie for you then.
Yeah, although I love Chris Nolan. I mean, Dunkirk is probably the best movie I've seen in the last couple of years. But yeah, it was a little choppy.
The Unplugged challenge. You guys have a list of really easy to do, really common sense action items anybody can do, and you have different sort of levels. Talk about some of the different challenges out there that people can just try and see how it affects them.
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, some of it is regarding like fasting, as you mentioned. So just whether you start with Frank's protocol, like a 17-hour fast, and then we don't want to go down the rabbit hole with more here. So even though we put like, oh, well, you may want to then progress to a 24-hour fast, or you may want to go long. It doesn't need to become a cult of more. Just try, like you said, even if it's intermittently fasting. So eat dinner the night before, and then don't eat again until lunchtime the next day is a real simple fasting protocol that you should be able to do. Again, if you don't set yourself up for failure by thinking, but wait, I'm a hard gainer like me, right? Like this is one of my objections. Like if I gain half a pound of muscle, it's like, yes, and now I've got to fight to put in 30 grams of protein every 2 hours. But that's a fallacy. But so don't set yourself up for failure, or try doing some of the heat and ice stuff, even if that you don't have access because you can't afford a custom barrel sauna in your backyard and you don't have somewhere to put an ice bath or any desire to jump into a giant frozen steel tub. I mean, I don't know why anyone wouldn't want to do that, right? I mean, come on. But even if you just distill it to its essence of like a really hot bath and then a stinking cold shower for like a minute or two, just do that, and don't do it every day because again, then your body stops responding to the stimulus. So just do that maybe 3 times a week. Maybe try taking a break from your technology for an evening, one evening. Then try make it okay. Well, you're going to go out maybe on a road trip with your family. Well, switch off your phone and put it in the glove box for a day. That Saturday drive day, the 8 hours you're going to be driving. Like it with us. Somehow my wife roped me into to driving from Colorado to San Diego the last 2 summers, which I'm like, I need more mobility after that than you can shake a stick at. Like fetch the giant spatula to scoop me out. But just turn off my phone. Like she's got hers if she needs to. If we break down and we need to call AAA or whatever, that's fine. But yeah, so maybe try something like that. Or like I said earlier, trade your treadmill for the trail, or trade your fancy Tour de France, enabled touchscreen bicycle that you paid $4,000 parentheses. You could have just gone to France and got hostels and ridden that with your buddies for a few weeks for the same amount of money. But anyway, that aside, maybe go out on a bike ride or join a running club that's outside or something like that. And that's another thing that inadvertently brings me to another aspect of the book is authentic community. Like Brad Stulberg at Outside Magazine did a great piece fairly recently where he talked about instead of using your fitness tracker or your smartwatch as accountability, maybe just find a buddy. You like tennis, he likes tennis, or maybe you start playing a game or 2 a week at lunchtime or after work, or your brother and you used to work out when you were in high school, and you're back in the same hometown, so why don't you reinstitute an old custom and start lifting? Like our buddy Travis Jewett, you mentioned Iowa, he's in Iowa, has a setup that he calls the Yard, where he just gets some guys from the neighborhood together and they go out and do some kettlebell carries and swings and some deadlifts, and just get that going in your neighborhood. And so yeah, just these very simple steps, and it's really nothing big, but I think if you start to do these things once a week, and then it becomes twice a week or 3 times a week, and you may start to see an accumulation effect, even if it isn't measurable by some fitness tracker data point. That just, like you were saying earlier, just maybe you feel like your sense of anxiety diminishes. Maybe you feel like you're suddenly sleeping a bit better, or you have more consistent energy throughout the day. I mean, it could be any of these. It could be none of these. So just go and introduce a little bit of adversity. If you can be outside instead of being indoors to do whatever, then do so. And just go away and play and make it fun again. Like when did fitness and movement become this chore? Like one more thing to do, and 1 more mile to get, 10 more reps to get, 10,000 more steps to get. Like, when did it become this grind? Like, go out and find something, either rediscover a sport that you used to find fun earlier in life, or heaven forbid, try a new one, and don't be worried about failing, and don't think that you need a $12,000 bike that you can lift up with one finger. If you want to start cycling, just go buy a freaking bike from Dick's, or, pick a sporting goods outlet and just go out and try it,
Yeah. Well, and while you're trying this stuff, take notes. If you want to track something, take notes about how you feel a week in, 2 weeks in, a month in, because that'll give you something to look at over time to know, going back to our big question, is this working? If you try intermittent fasting, it's not for everybody. If you're a basket case on intermittent, then don't do it. I mean, if it's causing your life to get worse, then try something else. But definitely take notes. And maybe categorize your tech. One of the other points that was made at the end of the book that I almost wish you guys would have expounded on a little bit more is, things that are useful technology that, you don't need to abandon, and things that, are interfering with your actual pursuit of health and fitness that you do need to take a second look at. And I was thinking about that on my bike ride that I screeched in from just before we started talking.
Well done.
I had a very plugged in bike ride, as it were. I had my Garmin, it was running. I had my phone in my pocket that was, broadcasting the road ID blip to my wife, so if someone runs me off the road and I end up in a ditch, they know where to find the body. I've got a camera on the back of my bike that's twirling lights at people and taking video of cars passing me too close, all that sort of thing. Some of that technology is really good to have. You want to have video of the car that ran you off the road so you can find them and put them in jail. You want to have technology that helps you be safer and helps you have a good experience, but you don't want to be staring at the numbers on your Garmin the entire time and, wondering, oh, am I making enough power? Am I going to hit this Strava segment hard enough to take the KOM from, my buddy, all this sort of thing. It's about, identifying the pieces of technology that can be a detriment to what you're pursuing, and then managing your relationship with those devices, I think it's complex, but it can be done, and everybody, especially in this day and age, and especially as technology becomes more pervasive to everything that we're doing, needs to be a point of interest for everybody. So I'm going to wrap up with a question I've introduced recently, and it's gotten some really solid answers. Who is on your Mount Rushmore of health and fitness?
Without sounding like I'm on somebody's payroll, I mean, Kelly Starrett, not just because he introduced me to Brian and to Andy and to, therefore through them to Frank Merritt and others, but I think that he and Gray Cook were really the guys that started this movement quality revolution and started looking at also just their philosophy of self-care. And Gray has said, like, you should be trying to put yourself out of business every day. And Kelly pours so much into each of his books, not to say, oh, and then you need to come to this mobility course and pay me X amount of dollars, or you need to come to me for a private coaching session at, X amount of money. But what he's saying is, as a fully functional human being, you should be able to move in this kind of way. It should be sustainable. And if you're not able to, and it isn't, here are some things that you can start to do. And here's a minimum effective dose, 10 minutes a day, every day, to help you get to where you need to go. And everyone that I've encountered through him in this space, Dr. Fergus Connolly, that I co-wrote Game Changer with, which really distills his principles of team sports. Again, he wasn't holding anything back. When you write 193,000 words, you're not holding anything back. Like, this is full disclosure. This is complete transparency. This is everything that you need to know. And the same with Brian and Andy and Frank and all the rest. The Barbell Shrug guys, Doug and Mike and the rest of the team have the same mindset. There's so many out there. Really, it starts with core values. And their core values are, we want to change the world one person at a time, one movement pattern at a time, and really just help people either break out of states that are not conducive to the kind of results that they want, or even damaging, and to help them get into those kind of states to get in position to be in position, right? Whatever that means for you, whatever game day is for you, whether game day is going and kicking a ball around with your kids, which I try to most evenings, or the trail walks we do as a family together. or you are, a competitive athlete who's trying to be elite, or anywhere in between. How are these things that we're writing helping you to improve your life, to fix yourself if you're broken? And then also, just to kind of the trainer mentality, how are you then able to go away, and if your mother-in-law's hip is acting up, help her with that? Or how are you able to, your buddy that you train with has hit this plateau for some reason, and you realize, oh, he's not breathing right. Well, Brian showed me this thing the other day. Maybe he should only nasal breathe in and out when he's doing his anaerobic work. Like that. Well, that seems pretty scary to some people, maybe pretty simple to others, but a lot of these things are simple fixes. So it all comes from this place with Kelly and Gray, Andy, Brian, Fergus, Frank, the rest of them. And pretty much, others, Brett Bartholomew, even writers like Brad Stulberg and Chris McDougall, of course, that their goal is to not just tell you these stories and give you these scenarios to show how great they are or how knowledgeable they are, but really just to empower you to get into this self-care mindset. And so you're able to go away and improve your life and improve the lives of others around you. And that to me is like, holy crap. If these guys are not just enriching me from a knowledge standpoint and not just educating me along the way, but they're allowing me to be the conduit and to serve them to get that message out and to help other people, then yeah, I hope I can do this for the rest of my life with these people and continue developing these relationships so that we can help move the needle for people a little bit.
Yeah, how lucky are we to get to talk to people at that level who just want to make the world better, man. Like, definitely one of the best parts of my job. Phil, this has been fascinating. It's been a ton of fun. We are way over our time budget, but that's okay. That's what editing is for. Where can people find your work, your current efforts, and future efforts all around the web?
All the usual social channels, which is ironic to even say that, right? But write a book called Unplugged. I don't want to be on there. You don't want to be on there. But anyway, so yeah, /Phil White Books, and then that's the same as my website, philwhitebooks.com. So yeah, drop me a line, comments, questions, even criticisms. We want to keep getting better with this stuff and how we get the information out there. And so I just, a lot of my day is conversations every day, whether it's this with co-authors, with experts, whatever, and I'm just curious to have those conversations with anyone and everyone. So would love to talk to you, whoever you are, whatever your perspective is, whether you like what we're doing, hate what we're doing, somewhere in between, have ideas, share them, and let's talk.
Awesome. I really appreciate your time. We'll talk again soon. I think we're going to have a lot more work from you here in the future.
Oh yeah, whether you like it or not.
See ya.